First and foremost, I want to thank you so much for taking out the time to come on the platform. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. It's definitely amazing. It's dope, and I really look forward to hearing more about it.
Amazing. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak to any art aficionados or art supporters or artists.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely an honor. Definitely. Now for the viewers who may not recognize you, let them know what your name is and definitely where you're from.
Okay, my name is Sherwin Banfield. I go by Sherwin the Artist. I'm over here in Queens, New York. Originally from Trinidad and Tobago, um, but yeah, I'm a Queens representative.
Wow, that's what's up. Big shout out to Queens, most definitely. Now I can ask you this: when did you develop this passion for art? Is it something that kind of runs in your family? Is it something you always wanted to do, or did you kind of get into it later in life?
Yeah, well, it does run in my family. My mother is very creative. My father has some skills when it comes to drawing, um, and my brother and myself, we both just happen to have this God gifted talent, and we recognize it at an early age. Um, because that's we were always creative, making things with our hands and coming up with ideas, and yeah, we were makers.
Okay, okay, cool, cool. Now I want to ask you this: by you being from, you got the Caribbean roots, you raised in New York. When did you first get, I guess, in contact with hip hop? Was it something that was already going on in the community at the time, or did you get exposed to it through radio and television? Or
In Trinidad, it was definitely making its way into the DJ mixes, right? Go to parties, and you would hear this new music, this new art form, hip hop, and there were either TV shows that came on TV that showcased it, or you come across a book that had like these illustrations on how to do breakdancing, how to do a windmill, how to pop and lock. So it was entering the culture uh, when I lived in Trinidad, and when I came to the United States, yeah, it was everywhere. I lived in East Orange, New Jersey, so that's very black, um, multicultural, but I was surrounded by mostly by black people, so the music was everywhere.
okay, okay, cool, cool. Now I asked you that because not only because of your roots and where you're from and where you live at currently, but I first got hip to your work through some of the sculptures that I seen online, like the big piece and the LL piece. Now when did you actually start? I guess doing it professionally.
Well, you just gotta an artist's journey is very unique, and professional can be defined in many ways, right? Most folks define professionalism as you are, making a living off of your discipline. Um, so the art world is very, very interesting. So most artists, the the lucky artists, are able to make a living completely off of their work, right? And that's a gift. That's an honor. Um, and some of us, we have other side hustles to make it work, because some of us have families, like myself, I have family. So to answer your question, I would say I think my professionalism started um, after a few of my public sculptures started to gain recognition. Yeah, yeah, I would say the LL sculpture is what really um, made the transition happen as a professional sculptor. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I think I seen that one on like the Rock the Bells. They had reposted it. Now when did you actually do that sculpture, and what inspired you to do it?
Well, that sculpture was created during COVID, and I remember having to find a way to get it done because the space I was currently previously using was no longer available. I didn't have an exact location to install it, and I just needed a place to sculpt, to execute, and to deliver and install. It was just start and see what happens, right? And along the way, opportunities showed up to allow it to continue to develop into a final piece, right? Even the space that I needed, the studio space I needed, I applied for a opportunity with LMCC, that's Lower Manhattan Cultural Committee, I believe, and they have space on Governor's Island um, that they offer for artists. And my cohort was the first cohort during COVID to return to Governor's Island to be a fellow uh, artist in residence, and that's why I made the LL sculpture. Like I was commuting, you know, by ferry onto that island to get going with the sculpture and sculpt, and the time limit, the last ferry leaves around 6, so I had to jump on that last ferry to make sure I get home with the family. So yeah, that sculpture was is a adventure in itself, the way how it developed and how it actually came to fruition. The inspiration for that of course is hip hop, but I got the idea to start the LL sculpture um, by a friend of mine, and he suggested I do LL, and I was like, yeah, this is a good idea. He's a living legend. He's a icon of mine, and I appreciate his music, his style, his whole artistic legacy, and his catalog. So he's legendary. So he's definitely worthy of a statue.
LL is the goat's goat. So you definitely, gave props to the right person. But the sculpture is dope from top to bottom. One of the things that I noticed, you had the Africa continent on the foundation, and I think I seen that maybe in another sculpture that you had done. I think that's so dope. You know what I'm saying? You got
Right.
so many things going on, but it's like to just take the time out to put that in there. That's something that really stood out to me. And now have you met LL? Because he been Rock the Bells. They've been sharing this. So
Yeah, I have. But to make a quick note about the Africa symbolism on just about every one of my figurative sculptures, from the LL to the Biggie to the Red Alert, the Phife, Jam Master Jay, and Prodigy. The reason for that, which kind of connects back to Trinidad, is that growing up in Trinidad, the Caribbean, um, uh, the culture of Trinidad is very deeply rooted in carnival, right? And during carnival, throughout my entire years growing up, it includes being around, the soca music, but these loud speakers that would play the soca music, right? And that rhythm that came through those speakers is in that DNA. It is the one unique quality that African people possess, this connection to rhythm, uh, the drum, that frequency travels with us, right? Whether we are native to um, the islands, native to America, or were some of the Africans that were transported to, right? Uh, and that frequency, from my understanding, began in Africa.
one thing about the LL mural you had mentioned, he's a living legend, and I think a lot of times, we don't give people their flowers in the hip hop community. Why they still alive. So I think that's dope that you did create a sculpture of LL while he's still around. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of times we gotta wait till we gone to get that sculpture or that street named after us or that painting or that mural.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's important
Yeah.
because, there's definitely a concerted effort by the ruling class to control the narrative and control when you are a thing, a hit, and and whether you should exist for how long in people's minds, and control whether you stay within the history. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure, at least through my talents, that um, our cultural contributors are able to be seen and monumentalized and upheld using what's considered the high arts, right? Um, and also to showcase truth within this whole culture of fallacy. You know what I mean? This world that this composed world that we live in, which is made up of a lot of fallacies and misinformation and hidden information. To me, hip hop is it's the truth. It's us speaking of our own um, uh, issues and um, our love, our daily routines, just sharing our stories, sharing our plight, and sharing our achievements. And to me, that's more truthful than the world that we are expected to learn about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Now I wanted to ask you this. I don't know if you spoke on it. Now, how long does it take to create something like that? Because a lot of times we may go to a museum or we may go to a park and we take it for granted, and you're like, "Wow, this is an amazing piece." And for a lot of people, it may just be a couple seconds or maybe even a couple minutes, and we kind of take a picture and then we go on, not realizing like how much work was put into this masterpiece.
Yeah, sculpture is that thing that you just cannot decipher. It's difficult to decipher um, the work that went into it because there is very little education within the curriculum um, for the average person on how sculpture is made. Because sculpture is, especially public sculpture, is created um, in a way that it's expected to survive, the elements of nature. So, making something out of marble, stone, and metal like bronze requires a lot of skill, time, effort, and just it's just like know-how. And if you're dealing with figurative work that is representational, you're dealing with years of study of anatomy and understanding human form and understanding the differences within each face and body structure and time, what time does to the body. So um to answer your question, that my pieces, depending on the direction of the piece, conceptual to finished piece, can be anywhere from uh I would say average around 2 years, because there's multiple moving parts to it. If you look at the LL, the Biggie, there is a figurative or a bust of the represented person, and that's traditionally sculpted in clay and then casted in bronze. Um, but then it's designed to fit to the greater structure, which is constructed, fabricated out of stainless steel and steel, with other elements added to it. Like the LL has a radio in the front of it that's a cast of a radio that I like handmade with wood, um, casted and made into a resin cast, right? And there's other elements that are on the side of it. There's a relief of a panther, a relief of a goat that was done in clay and then casted in bronze and affixed to the structure. And you have other elements that are made um, in in clay, but also but casted in stone, like a stone material. And you have the solar panels that have its own measurements that have to be incorporated seamlessly into the structure. So the measurements of those panels are considered for the measurements of the base, which includes speakers and a whole solar power system on the inside. It's engineered by a solar power engineer, um, and it has the audio system with the speakers, and that has to be um, designed in such a way that it's like held within a casing and not accessible by rodents or bugs. So there's a lot in temperature, because New York is the hottest of hot and the coldest of cold, so it has to be able to withstand the fluctuating temperatures. So there's a lot of engineering, a lot of designing, a lot of aesthetically aesthetic choices that went into creating it so that it can survive and still look good and look like the individual. You know, yeah,
Yeah, man, that's deep. That's deep. I didn't even think that far into it. Like I say, we take it for granted because I'm just thinking about you putting it together. But like you said, you mentioned the weather. That's meteorology. You mentioned engineering. You mentioned anatomy. That's like some medical field type stuff. And it's like
mm,
for it to look the way that it looked, you could tell that you took your time, and that's going all the way back to all of the learning and all of the information that you took in along with just the knowledge of hip hop and LL to create that piece, man. That's really
right,
amazing. That's dope.
right, yeah, yeah. Luckily, LL has a book, um, autobiography, and I was able to digest the information in that book to add to the sculpture. You know, because it had to represent him and his story. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no doubt, no
There's
doubt.
even
Representing well.
there's even a portion of it where he went travel to man, I forget now, the uh, he's in Nigeria or Ghana, and he was crowned king. And he in Indira symbols of the Akan people. He took some of those symbols and put a tattoo of it on his leg. So I saw the tattoos and made sure I recreated it in sculptural form to add to the sculpture, which adds to his story, which also adds to the African symbol that's part of it. So that's Allah has done a lot. He's done a lot of firsts, and he's incredible human being.
Yeah, yeah, yes indeed, yes indeed. What inspired that piece? Big from Brooklyn. Were you a fan of his music? I mean, like a diehard fan, or was it something in particular that you seen that inspired you, or what's the backstory?
Well, that story was that originally was a commission that never happened. Um, the commission process um, collapsed during the funding stage, but I already created drawings, idea, a working idea, and a vision for the piece. Yes, I am a fan of Big's music. Um, my first year in art school in New York, one of my next door neighbors, her boyfriend, put me on to Biggie. This back in '94, um, and he was Jamaican, and yeah, man, it's you couldn't escape the legacy and the the artistry, like the innate vocal understanding of sounds and frequency by Biggie, and the way how he brought his lyrics to life, in his delivery. And his music was infectious. It was hypnotizing because it includes samples from music that I listened to, my parents listened to growing up. So there's a lot of moving parts to Biggie that made him so successful and so admired and so so talented to be crowned, the King of New York. And it brought me great pleasure to be able to make such a sculpture, and dedicate it to him. Yeah. Not to mention the mix, the dedicated mix, audio mix in the statue was created by DJ Mr. C, who was instrumental in bringing Biggie from the corner to the the record deal. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Okay. That's cool. That's real cool. Let me see. I know we kind of 27 minutes in, but we got kind of disconnected. Do you have a couple minutes if I could ask you maybe about one or two more pieces, or
Yeah, I
you
got
gotta
about
go?
5 minutes. About 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. Cool. Cool. Let me ask you about one more piece. You got the is it Jam Master Jay, Phife Dawg, and Prodigy?
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah. 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 Just if you could tell the backstory, the inspiration behind that.
Well, that piece is that's the piece that jumped it all off. That's the first. Um, that's the first of my hip hop monuments. That is a group of sculptures I named the Cipher in Queens, and it was accepted into the Socrates Park Fellowship. And I applied uh, about a few weeks after my job of like many years had let me go. And with that severance and the fellowship grant, I decided to create those sculptures, which was an idea I've had for a minute, but it really formalized into what it is um, when I was applying to the open call. You know, I wanted to have three, deceased hip hop artists from Queens represented, which had different sounds and was so impactful. Um, they were all part of groups, and each had their own era of popularity. And you had Mobb Deep, Prodigy, who represented that hardcore, that frustration, that real the realness of like representing your hood, your environment, you know, of poverty. Run DMC being the kings of Queens, having taken hip hop worldwide, having that flair, that ability to appeal to multiple, you know, cultures. They were the ones that brought that to the world. You know what I mean? It's different when you're acclaimed within your hood, but when you realize the music is also um, able to connect to a world audience, that's a big deal. Um, and then you have a Tribe Called Quest, which represented the history of Queens, a history of the jazz artists that lived in Queens that contributed significantly to American culture and to world culture. So you have Queens really is the Queens, and Queens hip hop really is world hip hop. It's the Queens hip hop culture that really took it worldwide. You know.
Yeah, 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 definitely, definitely. I have to agree with that. Now for the viewers, if they want to keep up with what you got going on, they want to check out some of your previous work and follow up with some of your upcoming projects. Do you have a website or a social media or anything like that?
Yes. So Sherwin the Artist on Instagram, and basically that'll lead you to everywhere. Got a link tree. It leads to my website, to my articles, to whatever I'm up to. So yeah, definitely check out Sherwin the Artist on Instagram.
All right, all right. I want to thank you again for coming on the podcast, man. I really appreciate you. This is definitely an honor. I truly appreciate the work that you're doing, and I definitely look forward to the work that you have coming in the future.
Sounds good, brother. Appreciate you. Thanks for the invite.
All right, peace. Be safe out there.
All right, peace out there in Madagascar. and all of the continent.
Yeah.